Hey everybody, it is Cal Nitro for Nitro Maniac TV's Wrestling Unlimited, and this was the NITRO'S Take that you guys voted on for August. Unfortunately, it's the last week of October, so before I get going with all the Halloween and spooky theme stuff, I gotta get to this to clear this out of the way. This was a unanimous vote winner against several other summer themed pay-per-views. I think there was a couple of Summer Slams in there and UWF Beach Brawl as well. This was ECW Heatwave 1999, and this is my take on the RF video version of ECW's Heatwave 1999 from Dayton, Ohio. The event is July 18th, 1999. This is a 7-match card from the historic Hera Arena in Dayton, and of course the Hera Arena in Dayton unfortunately got a little bit of damage, I think, from some of the tornadoes and that stuff that were in the Dayton, Ohio region at the beginning of the year. So if any of my subscribers or viewers or people who just kind of stumble across this video on the interwebs live in the Dayton area, let me know in the comments below what they're doing to the Hera Arena. Are they bothering with fixing it up? Are they going to, unfortunately tear it down because of the damage or anything like that? But I think the last I heard is that all plans were going forward and doing a lot of fixing to the building and hopefully having that building back up and running. And gosh, we as wrestling fans would love to see it because it is a historic building. There's been a lot of ECW shows shot there, a lot of WWE shows shot there, a lot of WCW shows shot there. I can imagine that in 2020, if that building is back up and operational, AEW will probably take a look at it. Just put in the comments below what they're doing with the Hera Arena, because it'd be a pity to see that building go by the wayside. But yeah, it had a lot of tornado damage and that stuff, from what I remember correctly, back in April or May, whenever the severe weather kind of hit that region. And of course, that's just a small bit of damage that that community endured. Of course, living here in Edmonton, we had a huge tornado back in the late 80s and that stuff that was a real damage and real detrimental to the city itself at the time and everything. But life goes on. People pack up and they rebuild and everything. So I can only imagine that everybody's doing the same thing down there. But just put the comments below about the Hera Arena, what they're doing with it, because I would love to know for sure. So anyways, I've been asked a lot, why am I watching the DVD version of this when this is on the network and you could probably find it online and you name it through various other sources? Story with this is this was a bonus to a pre-order to my very first WrestleCon that I went to back in New Orleans in 2014. RF Video was one of the presenting sponsors, and they had a bunch of DVDs available that you could send out if you pre-ordered your tickets online and that stuff for WrestleCon that year at the Sugar Mill in New Orleans. I believe it was sort of Sugar Bowl, Sugar Mill, something like that. And so with my pair of tickets that I had ordered for myself and a friend, we got a DVD bonus with that. And I had chosen this show just because I was on a classic ECW kick at the time, and was kind of interested to see what this is. And what this is essentially a off-air dub of what went to air on the pay-per-view. I don't know if RF still makes these or not, just due to the fact that the library got sold to WWE. You can get all the pay-per-views on the WWE network and everything. But that DVD has the original music for everybody, all of the original little foibles and production snafus that any pay-per-view would have. I ended up picking up while I was down in New Orleans, of course, Heatwave 98 from RF, as well as a couple other ECW shows that I have in my collection. And I think that these are incredible. It's kind of cool to see how the show is supposed to kind of flow, and how it was when it went to air on the pay-per-view, without all of the let's say back-end cleanup that the WWE network gives these products when they end up being archived on a network and so forth. So Yeah, so this was the version of the show that I decided to watch. You can check out RF Video and see if they still have copies of it or not. If not, just look for them online. I've seen a lot of them on sale through eBay and everything, the whole deal. So, runs about 3 hours or so. So anyway, the pay-per-view and the DVD opens with one of those infamous ECW Pulp Fiction promos with everyone in it claiming to be the hottest star of ECW Heatwave 99. The Dudleys take it literally and state that Balls Mahoney will be the hottest star as he will be set on fire. ECW, everybody. It's well worth a watch. Check out the first few minutes of the show, definitely. Don't skip through this opening or anything like that. It is classic ECW and sets up everything very nicely. Our opening contest, Danny Doring and Roadkill with Miss Congeniality, which ended up being Lita in WWF and WWE circles, taking on Nova and Chris Chatty. Doring comes out, kind of runs down the crowd. The crowd responds with some rather unflattering chants towards Miss Congeniality. And there's an ECW style marriage proposal involving a ring made out of a condom. And it's ECW. And yeah, you write these notes down, honestly, a few months ago, and you take a look at them now, and it's like, my God, this show. Anyway, so after that whole thing in the ring with Congeniality, Doring, and Roadkill, the music hits, and Nova walks the ring, who is an indie darling at this point in his career before getting worked into the WWE system in later years. And Chris Chatty. And of course, the knock on Chris Chatty at the time was he had zero personality. And Chatty walks out with a top hat and cape. The knock on him in the weeks leading up to the pay-per-view, storyline-wise, was that Chatty had no personality, kind of like a Lance Storm shooter type personality where, yeah, the guy's a phenomenal wrestler, but very dry in promos and kind of, starting to get some boos from the crowd and asking for just being boring. And so this was the knock that they were jabbing at a little bit and kind of getting a personality for Chatty going forward. And of course, he would take this persona and turn it into a real nice mid-card heel persona for himself over the next year or so, and be one of the, if not top heels when ECW closed. He was right on the upper echelon of cracking into that top echelon, right when ECW closed with this. So this was the start of some big things for Chris Chatty going forward, and not just because he was Taz's cousin or whatever. Styles then quips about the locker room being young at the time. Styles himself was 28. There's a reason for a young locker room then. ECW was rebuilding. Of course, they were rebuilding because a lot of their big stars were being signed to other companies. You take a look at Bam Bam Bigelow, who had just left, went to WCW in the months earlier. They tried to bring in Sid Vicious, but then he himself decided to jump ship and go back to WCW. This would be nothing compared to what would happen, ironically, after ECW jumps onto TNN. Now, by this point, the TNN deal had been announced. There is a lot of TNN hype for this show for ECW and its premiere coming up at the end of August. This is a real hot opener with tons of double team moves from both sides, not just Doring and Roadkill, but from the Nova and Chris Chatty side as well. Chris Chatty hits a real nice springboard clothesline. Then he grabs a mic and says, "Let's kick it." And of course, it being 1999, Ricky Martin's Living La Vida Loca hits. ECW. Anyways, the finish is a double team tidal wave, and it gives Chatty and Nova the 1-2-3. Chatty has the persona going forward, and of course there would be a feud built up between the two of them over the next year or so. Kind of the seeds of a long-term program being planted here with these guys, and of course they would end up being a very important part of ECW's tag team division going forward once teams like the Dudleys and that ilk decided to venture forth into new directions. We didn't get a hype video for Taz versus Tajiri, where Taz lays down the challenge for the pay-per-view. Steve Corino comes out. He was kind of acting as a mouthpiece for Tajiri at the time and says that Taz is afraid of himself, of Steve Corino. Taz then pretty much swears for 30 seconds straight. No joke, ECW. And, of course, that's the beauty thing about these is that they come straight off the air, off of the pay-per-view feed. So, no network censoring or anything like that. You get the full meal deal. And, of course, this was a big reveal that Tajiri was the third man in this whole kind of heel stable that Corino was building for himself. The fourth man. Almost forgot about Jack Victory there. But Jack Victory, Rhino, and Corino had been working as a trio for a while. And, of course, Tajiri was introduced in as the heel fourth. This is, of course, is really important stuff to know before the main event, and they did a great job of recapping it all here. Joey Styles then announces on camera that the first ECW TV taping for TNN is August 14th. I hope it works out for them, and, of course, the entire back history of the TNN ECW run is available on the WWE Network. I urge everybody to go watch it. It's a great binge watch if you have like a week or two where you have the time to devote to it, or you have a hankering for it. Next up was a intergender match. Now, of course, WWF at the time had been doing intergender stuff throughout the summer and into the fall with China, doing handicap matches with Triple H and The Rock, or China now starting to work out matches on her own with her own programs, starting to work with Jeff Jarrett and Chris Jericho and those of that ilk. But ECW here had kind of an implosion of the original OG Impact Players faction, where Jason, the sexiest man alive, took on Jazz, who had been this young women's wrestling phenom that ECW had signed. But ironically, with a ton of valets in ECW at the time, there wasn't really a lot of girls that could wrestle, women's matches. And of course, women's matches at the time were basically, TNA. It was just a sideshow act. It's nothing compared to the scene we've got today. So this was a very interesting contest for 1999, and 20 plus years later, it's fun to watch again. This is not a very long match. I think it only runs about 6 or 7 minutes or so. Of course, Dayton, Ohio is 100% behind Jazz as the babyface in this match. It's a very passable and very entertaining larger athlete versus a smaller athlete story. Momentum for Jazz just building here. This was her launching point. And the finish, Jazz hits the Jazz Stinger finish for the 1-2-3 count on Jason, and she's launched. And she would get a great run in ECW and in an even bigger run to cement her legacy as one of the premier women's wrestlers of the past 20 years, I would think, 20 to 30 years, and just being brought back for everything, from AEW's All Out Battle Royal that we saw earlier this year to, NWA title matches, to you name it. But she's involved in everything up to this point. But this was her starting off point. This was the jumping off point to Jazz as a character and as a wrestling talent. And, I think a great launch. Don Callis crashes the play-by-play booth. It's Joey and Cyrus now for the rest of the pay-per-view. Of course, this was the beginnings of Cyrus, or Don Callis, as the color commentator, as he had been brought in after his WWE run. If you listen to the Killing the Town podcast and everything, you know the backstory on it. I'm not going to rehash it here, but it's a very interesting story, a very interesting career arc for Don Callis, who was this can't-miss blue-chip prospect going into WWF, who was, who he fought, knew the right people with Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation and everything. And then when that all imploded, kind of his run at WWF kind of imploded at the same time. So that and his tag team partner getting signed by WCW, i.e. Rick Martel. So cruiserweight action next, where we see Little Guido, James Maritano take on Super Crazy, and Crazy walks out using an awesome techno remix of Roadhouse Blues by The Doors. This, of course, wasn't a Harry Slash song, and I think this was one of Crazy's first appearances in ECW. I need to get this. I need to find this. I will have to rewatch the pay-per-view and use the old, not Spotify, whatever that app is where you hold it up to the speaker and it tells you what song it is. It's not coming to mind right now, but you know what I mean. The match opens with some incredible chain wrestling. I love watching both these guys in ECW, especially in the TNN run. They always put on a great match, and they always seem to be booked together with each other. So, Super Crazy hits a moonsault from a railing up in the crowd. That was wow. That was a very wow moment. Crazy then got roughed up on the outside by Saudi Graziano, who was working the corner with Little Guido at the time. Crazy gets the pin with the Tiger Powerbomb. I have this written down, Dark Horse match of the night. It's incredible, as it always was when these guys met. Any mixture of the two of them, and then later on you threw Tajiri in there for a freeway dance every time. And that basically was the formula for your not modern, but your ECW show from 20 years ago. Tag team title match up next, where we had Balls Mahoney and Spike Dudley take on the Dudley Boyz. Video package plays, kind of outlining the whole history of the feud, and of course it's 1999, so you get some White Zombie in the background because ECW had no chill on the copyrighted music at the time. We get the whole announcement again that the ECW debut will be Friday, August 27th, as part of the Friday Night Thrill Zone on TNN. And I think this was supposed to be a TV taping that would take place in Toledo, Ohio for ECW at the time. But the problem is that they recorded with all the television equipment and the lights and everything like that, and sent the tape back to Paul to review, and Paul Heyman didn't like what he's seen, so he gave TNN basically for that Friday, August 27th show, Jerry Lynn versus Rob Van Dam from a pay-per-view back in May, whenever Hardcore Heaven was, April, May of 1999. And so we seen that, and then basically a clip show or a best of some of the best from ECW's past and that stuff. It was a great way to introduce everybody. The problem is that, and maybe one day we'll get into it a little bit more on the channel. I would love to, either with Morehouse or somebody else. There's a ton of problems with doing that for your first show. And of course, this was the infamous in-ring promo with the Dudleys that is just so obscene and violent that I can't really do justice by reviewing this or saying word for word what they said. Obviously, again, just a lot of language and obscenities and that stuff. There would be no way in 2019 that any wrestling promotion would be able to get away with what was said here. But of course, it being 1999, 20 years in the past, and the social situations and that stuff being different, i.e. people actually had senses of humor back then, they could get away with a lot more with their television. And that's what ECW did, was they got away with a lot more and made do with a lot less. It was kind of some brilliant mixture, especially the later years, of just creative awesomeness, but the shows are out of control, and you keep pushing that every single week, and that's almost like an argument that you could say about AEW now, is the shows are almost out of control every single week. How much can you push, and how much can you do from week to week to week? So anyways, that whole bit is about, I want to say about 10 to 12 minutes long, and the Dudley Boyz have talked about it on their DVD set and in shoot interviews and everything about their whole mentality, so go check those out for sure. Watching it again in 2019 through 2019 eyes, it reiterates just exactly what I said. Is it's great, it's pushing the limit, it's awesome, but how often can you push the limit before people start either getting A, burnt out on it, or B, expecting it every single week? And once they start to expect that, everything you do will underdeliver. So Balls and Spike hit the ring right after that, and Balls has on a long sleeve shirt, or kind of arm protectors or socks or something like that. I think it's just a long sleeve shirt, but it's to sell the burns from the Odeon in Chicago some weeks prior. I don't think there was much of a sell job needed. It was legit. Balls was absolutely torched by that first ever burning table spot that they did in ECW, where, of course, they were influenced by the FMW guys, what they were doing in Japan. So they figured, well, we'll bring it to North America and see if it works. Just kind of cringeworthy looking back at it in 2019 eyes. We're a little older and a little wiser now. Joey tells us that it's a street fight and it's falls count anywhere. The bell rings, the match is on, and in the first 5 minutes, Balls gets cranked in the head with a headshot from a chair. Hello, CTE. Spike hits the acid drop on the ramp on Bubba. That was a great spot. Sign guy gets involved and pulls Spike out of the ring. Shortly after that, the Dudleys attempted double team maneuver, but Balls and Spike counter with double small package pins, and that's it. That's how they get the pin. 1, 2, 3, new ECW tag champs, but the match is not over. Dudleys didn't hit the 3D. Then Gertner hits the Dudley's lighter fluid. Looks like they're going to do a spot with 2 tables laid out, and they're going to lay Balls out on one table and Spike on the other and have them both on fire. Balls botches the power bomb, though, and gets dropped on his head. Spike doesn't. And then, of course, the Natural Born Killers theme hits. New Jack is in the house, and New Jack lays out the Dudleys. End of one of the most entertaining yet so ECW segments ever. Watching this back in August, when I initially watched this show for the first time, I had a lot more that I was going to say, but of course with the time and that stuff, and finally getting around to it now to review it, I would need to watch this again to kind of summarize it once again. But the whole thing makes the pay-per-view historic just because of the rant at the beginning and the confrontation with the crowd and nearly inciting a riot and that stuff. And then the match itself is entertaining, and then the aftermath of the match itself is eye-opening. But they were building to something long-term, and the Dudleys just ended up getting signed by WWE at the wrong time for ECW, and ergo, plans change, pal. So Tommy Dreamer then comes out to hype ECW on TNN. He says that the King of the Ring pay-per-view a few weeks prior was boring, and that WCW Bash at the Beach put him to sleep, as a lot of the pay-per-views WCW was producing in 1999 were. We'll get to those eventually, somewhere down the line. Then Carino, Rhino, and Jack Victory come out to interrupt. Carino runs down Dreamer's physiotherapy. Of course, Dreamer was out at the time with a almost career-threatening neck issue, I think it was, or a neck and arm thing. It was a back issue that they were saying on TV, but I think there was back, neck, all that lumbar region that was really bothering him in 1999 and into 2000. Carino asks Dreamer, was it worth it? Dreamer nods, of course, because he's ECW through and through. Dreamer says that he will never put Carino over, and then Carino jumps Dreamer. Dreamer quickly dispatches him, and Francine nails the Bronco Buster in the corner on Jack Victory, which makes a huge pop from the crowd. And then this is the thing that really confused me at the time. It still confuses me now. Francine then nails a swinging DDT on Carino and gets a 1-2-3 from an official in the ring. And I'm like, wait a second, did they just book a match? Was this our second intergender match of the card and just was not, announced or televised or something like that? It's just a surprise match. Tajiri then jumps Dreamer in the ring as he slaps Tarantula on Dreamer, and they're selling the back and of course and everything, and everyone's like, oh no, Tommy's back, right? The music for Taz hits, and then we have the Taz versus Tajiri ECW World Title match. Tajiri basically works on Taz's neck until a Tazplex levels Tajiri out of the corner. Kudos to them actually booking a match here. At this point in ECW's history, Taz should have squashed Tajiri, because Taz was doing this on almost a weekly basis on ECW TV and all the syndicated shows and everything like that, and even a little bit on TNN too before he jumped shift to WWF for that month or so prior to Anarchy Rules. And this itself was actually a really competitive match. A lot of weaponry, a lot of hardcore wrestling, which ECW was famous for, and that is ECW at the time. The finish of this match, though, was a little bit of a head scratcher. Right after Taz plexes Tajiri through a table, the camera then cuts wide as Taz brings out some barbed wire and chokes out Tajiri with the Taz mission while his arm is wrapped in the barbed wire. Tajiri taps, Taz retains. It's a weird ending because the camera's shooting out wide. You can barely see what's happening. I'm almost unsure if they had an issue with a pay-per-view carrier the month before, or if it was just something along the lines of maybe they were trying to be careful through here or something, but ECW was anything but careful a lot of the times. So this was a head scratcher to me how this thing ended up. Taz then throws Judge Jeff Jones off the ramp, who was trying to get a interview with him, and it sets up Mike Awesome's debut next pay-per-view because Jeff Jones comes back as the heel manager for Mike Awesome, and how Jones has this man from FMW in Japan that's coming over and that's going to make an impact, and he's awesome, and of course it's Mike Awesome, and lo and behold, next pay-per-view, it's Taz's farewell with ECW. So he leaves, drops the belt in a freeway dance, and it's between Tanaka and Awesome wins the ECW title. And going forward, that becomes a feud. And actually, historically, Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka was the last wrestling match that I watched in the millennium of the 19s, or the decade of the 1990s. And the last millennium, I guess, because that ECW on TNN episode aired on a Friday night, and New Year's, I believe, was back in 2000, a Friday night to Saturday type affair, and yeah, that was the last wrestling match that I seen back in definitely in the decade of the 1990s. So, with the decade of the 2010s wrapping up soon, I often wonder what will be the last wrestling match that I will see in the decade of the 2010s. So we'll see what happens. It depends on what I decide to watch and what's live on New Year's Eve, I guess. Great banter at the end of this match, though, between Callas and Joey, where Joey states that Bruce didn't love you, and that's why you're here. I really laughed. A lot of insider stuff, especially now, listening to all the podcasts that all these guys are on and that stuff. It's great stuff. Main event following the Teddy Long Strange Bedfellows tag team flavor of wrestling. Well, Teddy Long's Strange Bedfellows tag team flavor of wrestling for SmackDown and that stuff hadn't been invented yet. So it was the Impact players taking on Jerry Lynn and Rob Van Dam. One of the 99's top tag teams taking on, again, a Strange Bedfellows tag team. Lynn wanted to tag with RVD after Sabu got banned by ECW. Impact players had a role in it. Otherwise, this would have been Sabu and Rob Van Dam, otherwise known as Team Thunder, taking on the Impact players of Storm and Credible. And probably, if that was the pairing, Impact players probably would have went over, because Paul was building this as like this heel faction that just was running roughshod over ECW at the time. Some great technical wrestling to open with all four of these guys in the ring. It's hard not to have. RVD attempts to frog splash Justin Credible through a table. Sabu comes flying out of nowhere and splashes Credible, takes out the camera. Storm then attempts something in the ring where RVD blocks and nails a Van Daminator. Lynn then nails Storm with a cradle pile driver for a 1-2-3. I'm probably missing parts of that sequence. It is an incredible ending sequence. Like, it's just boom, 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 boom. And everybody thinks that, the timing on the indies is something now. It is nothing compared to the timing that these four guys had in the ring back in 1999. Like, this is just, it's a difference between watching almost sprint car racing and land speed record attempts. It's to make that comparison, or AHL hockey versus NHL hockey. These guys were like, watching McDavid and Ovechkin go one-on-one, to use a modern-day vernacular, or Gretzky versus Lemieux. All four of these guys in 1999 were at the top of their game, and they were amazing. Post-match, there was a freeway brawl that broke out between Lynn, RVD, and Sabu. The ECW theme music hits, and we look at highlights from the event. Yeah, like I said, solid 8.5 out of 10. I had that written down at the bottom of the notes, and still to this day, even 2 months after doing these notes, it's a solid 8.5 out of 10. I agree 100% with that for sure. All right, folks, later days and happy wrestling watching. I'm Calais Nitro. We'll see you next time. I'm glad to finally get this out of the way. Coming up next for a classic NITRO'S Take, we're going to go back to 1997, October 5th of that year. You guys voted it. You guys got it. It's coming up on October 31st on Halloween as my crown jewel replacement. I will give my take on the events and happenings of Bad Blood, 1997, in your house from St. Louis, Missouri. What is now the Scott Trade Center. At the time, it was just named the Kiel Center in St. Louis, and a very historic card. Some for some very wrong reasons, and some for, well, reasons that are still hyped on WWE TV today. Well, every October, except they've painted a damn thing red. It was the very first Hell in a Cell match. All right, folks. Talk to you next time. Later days.